Hey Phuong, how's it going?
Hi, good. How are you, Jesus?
Good, good to see you again.
Yeah,
Um, so thanks everyone for attending our session. So I'll kick it off. So just a little bit about me. So my name is Jesus Ramirez. I'm the VP of Strategy and Innovation at Tallwave, and I'm here with Phuong Petersen, CMO at SimpleTire. Um, so um, I think I'm really excited about this conversation. We're going to cover quite a bit of topics, everything from the direct to consumer space to building a great brand and customer experience, to looking at new consumer behaviors and how that's driving new opportunities for brands, and then what's on the horizon. What are some of the things that are coming down the pipeline and that we should all be excited about? But so there's a lot to cover here. But maybe to start, Phuong, you have such an amazing background. I'd love if you could share a little bit about your personal journey, your experience, and your background for us.
yeah, absolutely. So I usually start my background at I started in college at Hamilton College, which is a small liberal arts school, and I love small liberal arts because I think it helps you understand all the different types of connections you can make across a lot of disciplinary disciplines, and so that has been a really great background to then jump into finance, which is kind of odd as a marketing person to start in finance, but finance was a really great way to start my career because I believe that it's really important to understand kind of the fundamentals of what makes a business model work and how do you make businesses profitable. After a couple of years in finance, I decided that I wanted to be the person who kind of was like making the decisions on how to drive revenue and drive growth in the business versus kind of analyzing it and trying to inform the decisions. And so I decided to go to business school with the intention to transition into marketing. And I was able to go to Procter and Gamble after attending Wharton. And at Procter and Gamble, it was such a great, fundamental like start to a marketing career. It's the classic CPG where you learn all the branding and marketing fundamentals, such as like driving, learning consumer insights and how you use insights to drive communication and message strategy, but also new product development. You learn how do you bring all that to life in a creative idea and amplify that through a brand campaign. And then last, you learn how to partner with all the other people within your ecosystem, like your retailers, to really have it drive growth, not just with you, but with your retailers to drive growth in the market and the category. So after several years at Procter, I left just because I had the opportunity to move closer to home and closer to my family. And so we went to Boston, and I actually, looking back in the switch, it was like a really odd switch, candidly. Like I went from CPG brand management to commercial insurance. So jumping from consumer packaged goods to commercial insurance and the insurance financial services industry. And then not only that, doing B2B marketing. And so, looking back, I didn't realize how drastic of a switch it was until I look back at that. But it was a really great experience because it was still taking a lot of the frameworks I learned in brand management, but it's just applying it and thinking about it differently. And then B2B marketing, there's a lot of richness in B2B marketing that I don't think as a CPG person, as a BC person, business to consumer person, you would know until you do that and transition to that. So having that stint to learn B2B marketing in a very different industry kind of like made me realize there's a lot more out there to learn in marketing and thinking about how you apply marketing tactics and strategies across different disciplines and industries. From there, I, maybe late in my career, I realized, wow, there's digital advertising that's out there. And maybe I should learn a lot more about it because it really was when DTC was starting to pick up a lot. And we were testing a lot of direct-to-consumer products in the financial service industry space, insurance space. And so from there, I was able to get my hands dirty and go into a startup incubator within Liberty Mutual and start learning how to do AdWord campaigns. What's SEO? How do you think about email and deliverability of email? And fortunately, then was able to jump as CMO of Virtually and at Wayfair, which was a really nice, really rounded out my skills because I got to still work with the business owners to understand how do you create the brand strategy, the creative, how do you think about a lifestyle brand like what we did at Birch Lane, then but then also own the performance marketing side and own the ad spend efficiency and also the top line growth. And so a couple of years there was a really great place to really figure out how to put all the pieces together and think about that as a holistic CMO.
Yep.
And then lastly, like, SimpleTire, I joke, my husband's a early adopter of SimpleTire. So when SimpleTire was coming around, it's like, you should take a look at this company. It's got a lot of things going for it. You might not expect, and really fell in love with the founders, the culture, what they were doing, and realized that it was another place to really hone in on that holistic CMO skill set at a smaller place where you can actually like build something and then scale it. And we're at the right time to be able to do that.
That's fantastic. Yeah, thanks for sharing all that. I mean, I think what I find fascinating about your background is just the diversity of your roles and the well-roundedness of your roles, just given all the different types of businesses that you've worked on, and it's interesting because there's certain things that are commonalities across all industries, like focusing on customer and those sort of things, or like the importance of brand. But then there are very, very big differences, if you go, say, from B2C to B2B. And so it's interesting that you have that experience across all of those. So that's fantastic. So for those in the audience who may not be familiar with SimpleTire, can you tell us a little bit about the company? I think there's some really rich history with the company there. And share.
Yeah, SimpleTire was started in 2012 by two brothers, Andy and Josh Shalofsky, who saw a new way to think about how do we improve the tire buying experience for the customer in a tech-driven way. And so they partnered with Kenny Pratt, who's our CTO, to think about a new business model where, customers right now, what they realized was customers don't really see the selection of tires that they can get, when they just go to a brick and mortar. And secondly, the range of prices you can get with that selection. And so this was when, DTC was starting to pick up. They said, what if we can deliver this in a way for the customer and simplify the process a little bit? So they have selection, they have the value, they have an easier way of selecting the tires and being able to deliver them in this e-commerce way. And so the team, built that model, built that network of, connecting all of the suppliers together and then having an interface through e-commerce to be able to provide that for the customer. I would say in the last couple of years, to evolve that even more, it wasn't just about providing the selection of tires and the prices, but actually then thinking about how do we provide a better customer experience in the whole tire replacement journey. Tire replacement isn't probably the most exciting thing someone looks forward to when they have to do it. And it's quite of a daunting task if you think about, when you realize you have to solve the problem. And so they realized not only can we actually help select tires, but actually how do we create convenience out of it and do an all-in-one solution? So recently we were able to build our network further and have installation partners join our site to be able to then let the customer be able to find a place or find the tires, be able to select the tires, purchase tires, and book the installation and pay for all of it online, which is starting to create that convenience in the customer experience that I think is really important, especially for something like replacing tires.
Yeah, I mean, it's not the best experience to replace tires, and I love. It sounds like there's two really core aspects of what you're building. One being the convenience factor, and then two being the transparency factor. Transparency around pricing, selection, just information, and a certain amount of education that's involved, right?
Yeah, absolutely. So when you think about, we've been doing a lot of consumer research recently, and when someone understands that they have a problem, that they actually have to replace their tires, you start asking yourself a lot of questions. And one of the things I think is convenient with online is that you actually could, one, do it at your own pace. So, if you're not ready to tackle it today, you can take your time to do it versus when you go to a brick and mortar, you might feel a little more pressure to make those decisions quicker. So you could take your time to figure out how you want to create, solve the problem. You get more, you can research a lot of information online the way you like to research it. So you can find the right shop for you that might be closest to you. You might find the right availability of the tire that you're looking for. You might not even know what tire size you should have for your vehicle, which is like actually the first part of the process, which is a little daunting itself. And so having the ability to do it online, I think gives the customer some of that, helps lower the anxiety a little bit, because then they're able to control the experience more.
Yeah, that's fantastic. Yeah, one thing that's interesting is that SimpleTire is a part of this growing trend of companies that are moving from, what I would say is sort of a traditional retail sales model to a DTC model. And we're seeing this, with mattresses, appliances, even cars, right? And so I'm curious, what are some of the unique aspects and challenges of a DTC model that may not exist in traditional models?
Yeah, so you mentioned several categories, and even on virtually not from Wayfair, it's like furniture was another big one, as well as like thinking about it, because a lot of people like to see it in person and touch it and understand the dimensions. And so the first thing I think you think about in terms of going from traditional to DTC is that it's just a new process. Like, we're so used to going into a store and like looking at things, right? So the idea of just starting a whole new process, it's a new habit or new routine and habit that you have to figure out how to tackle.
Yep.
So that's the first challenge. And when you have something unfamiliar, the question is then how do you try to make it more familiar so it's not so daunting? So for example, like I mentioned on SimpleTire, we actually just released our Simple Snap feature, where I mentioned it's really difficult to find your tire, your tire size. You don't even know what a tire size is. You're trying to figure out where it is on your tire. So we actually created a product where you can take a picture of your tire that will identify your tire size. And then ultimately you could just upload the picture and it will get your tire recommendations. And what I love about that feature is that everyone kind of knows how to take a picture on their cell phone, right? And so if you just have to point your phone and take a picture where all the numbers are on the tire, and then it will just automatically tell you what the right tire size is. And like, these are the recommendations we say that you should think about for your vehicle. It's taking something familiar that you're used to and trying to make it a little easier and simpler to adopt the new process. And so, so you think familiar and trying to figure out how to connect certain familiar steps to it is a way to be able to help grease the wheels in trying to adopt a new habit or a new routine. I think the second piece is there's a lot of anxiety around a new process. One of the things we learned in our process was, when you have a multiple players in the experience, like the installer, us, and the customer, there is this question is like, do I know if it's going to happen seamlessly? And so we found communication is really important to lower that anxiety, that everyone's on the same page, everyone is brought along for the ride. And so you realize communication, a part of the customer experience, is really important to alleviate some of the anxiety that people might have on a new experience doing something online, like buying tires or mattresses or house or whatever it is nowadays.
Yeah, that's interesting. This notion of the anxiety, maybe not knowing sort of the full picture. One of the things that I was thinking about is when, up front, when you're making a decision about something like tires, what if something goes wrong? That's probably inevitably one of the questions that people are thinking about in this experience. And so there's ways I imagine to mitigate that up front so that those things aren't a concern, right?
Exactly. So, obviously, like easy returns is like the way. What I love about, to your point on like some of the experience that I've had, and then how do you think about connecting the dots and what you experience in your current role? When I was at CPG, you always think about the product itself. Like, what are all the different components to make the toothpaste experience better? So it's, so what's the basic function of a toothpaste? What do you want the experience to be when people are actually brushing their teeth and feeling the foam, the feeling of the mouth when you're done with the toothpaste, or you're brushing your teeth, for example, the experience of your white teeth, for example. There's all these things and components you think about from a product experience. And it's very similar when you think about just the overall DTC experience. How do you have all those pieces fit together to make it an overall seamless experience that someone doesn't even think about? So, those worries or anxieties of, oh, will the installer know that I'm supposed to show up, for example? Like, how do you make sure that the experience for them, that they don't have to have those questions? The other piece too, what happens if I don't really like the tires? What do I do with them? You just have to think about all the different components that you need to build an entire process and in your product to make sure it is like the experience that you would want to experience as a customer.
Yeah, that's great. Yeah, I think there's it's an interesting challenge to try to sort of anticipate some of those challenges along the way and address them early on. That's great. So one thing that, in our conversation, one thing that I really appreciate that you mentioned, and it sounds like this was very intentional from the very get-go, is that SimpleTire is really trying not just to build a great business, and certainly it is, but also trying to build a great brand, a recognized brand that has lasting power and is recognizable. And so obviously, a lot about building great brands with your experience at P&G and Wayfair and Liberty Mutual. And so how do you think about building great brands and not just great products or even great businesses? What's the difference between the two? And what are some of those components that you need to focus on early on?
Yeah, so it's interesting because there's the three components we talked about. There was brand, product, and business. And they're actually they're tied closely together in very different ways. And so I've been trying to figure out how to dissect that a little bit. When you think about a brand, the brand starts off with the product, right? So when you think about the brand is tied to a specific product, and what you try to do as a brand is try to elevate the brand to something a little more than just something as a functional benefits of product, but actually elevate it more to make an emotional connection with the customer around a certain higher order benefit, or even something like your brand vision. And so I think that's the aspiration of a lot of brands, is how do you get a person who associates your brand with a certain product that you might have at the beginning, but then how do you deliver? Obviously, you have to deliver the product benefit has to be consistent in what the brand's going to stand for. So there's some consistency there that you have to make sure that's there. But ultimately, then how do you elevate the whole experience or the idea of brand a little higher or more? So then you create that emotional connection, and that takes time. I think that takes time. It also, from a product point of view, it takes not just thinking about the product experience, but actually all the experiences before the product. So you kind of have to think about this halo effect of what the experience is. It's not when you actually use the product, but it's before, it's after, it's when you see the product on shelf. And then what's interesting about the business side of it with the component, the business model enables some of that product or customer experience then to elevate the brand. So if you don't have a sustainable business model, if you're not, allocating the right resources, then you're never going to be able to build a better product, build a better customer experience, and then ultimately spend money to build the brand. So the business model itself needs to be able to, you have to have the unit economics right for the business model to be able to fund and grow and nurture the product, the customer experience, and then the brand. And lastly, what I think is really exciting, you've made it as a brand, I say, is like when you're able to even think about, the business and the products evolve over time. It's not like it's static. And so then the question is, how's the brand stretch its equity and grow as the business grows and as the products grow? So I use the example like, Amazon, for example, it started off as just an online retailer of books. It probably was just associated at one point with books. But then as the business model grew, as it stretched its equity, now it stands for something completely different than books. And so that over time, that takes time. But that's where actually I think there's a challenge with brand builders, because what you're trying to do is create consistency of what people think of your brand, but then your business is stretching and growing. So then how do you ensure you keep the consistency, but then able to push it in places and ways that you know where your business model or where your expansion of product lines go into. And then ultimately, how do you elevate it in a way where it's not even just about the products, but it's about, an emotional connection on something more, like, Apple with innovation, Nike with like, just do it, or just like perseverance in some ways, empowering through things like that. That has nothing, those brands have a lot of equity that they've been able to stretch and build over time.
Yeah, it's almost like I think one of the things that resonates is this clarity of message that you need to have around your values, around your vision, and how the brand needs to represent something other than the product itself, and the product or the service really becomes sort of like one of the manifestations of the brand, right? And so
Yes.
you see this over and over. I mean, I think like a really good example of this is Disney and Disney Plus. They came out and they're they have theme parks, and then all of a sudden they launch a subscription service, and it immediately takes off because what people are buying is the brand, and not necessarily the product or the service,
Yes.
right?
Yeah. And it's the experience that the brand elevates in those different ways that they are able to do it. It's pretty incredible. And even that, like, I think to myself, like with kids too, now that I have kids, I think about certain brands like Lego and Crayola. Like, they have such a higher order, I think, brand in terms of creativity, imagination, education, but they're able to your point, have it manifest through these great products that, these kids are, my kids are always wanting, because it's like their way to express themselves too. So
Yeah.
I think it's pretty amazing when, and that took years. So it's pretty amazing how, collection of leaders who are able to keep the ship steered in a certain direction, but then add an element to it to evolve with generations. It's really impressive.
Yeah, that's awesome. So I'm going to shift a little bit and maybe talk about your customers and your partners. So the way your model works, and you've mentioned this a few times already, but there's actually three parties involved, right?
Mhm.
So there's three parties that you have to take into account. You have your customers, obviously, but you also have your suppliers, and then now you have your installers, your installation partners. And so in essence, you have sort of a multi-sided marketplace here.
Mhm.
And I imagine that you have to keep them all happy. And so what unique challenges does this represent? I mean, like how do you provide value and a great experience for all of them simultaneously?
Yeah. What I love about my role is that, my role not just owns, brand and performance marketing, but actually owns merchandising. So,
Hmm.
channel strategy, pricing, and promotion. So it really is like thinking about how do you partner with all these different people and have all those components work together to make it a win-win like relationship with them. And and so, the nice part is we all have, I keep going back, we all have the same goal in mind. Like, suppliers want to make sure they deliver the right tire to to the customer, right? And
Hmm.
installers want to have want us and the customer have an amazing experience, and vice versa. What I love about SimpleTire is when we think about our brand purpose, it's how do you take something complex and make it simple? That doesn't just resonate with the customer, that actually resonates with our suppliers. So how do you think about your brand, not just on like what's forward facing with the consumer, but how do we make sure our brand is expressed through all of our partners as well? So how do we simplify and make it easier for our partners to work with us is actually a really important part of our brand. And having a similar, I would say, like brand purpose and promise to all of our partners, including our customers, I think really helps us be able to make sure that we're kind of embodying the same spirit across all three.
Yeah.
With that said, it's just how it manifests itself is just a little different on how we think about working with our suppliers and what simplification, working easy working with us means, or versus, and also our installers and then our customers.
Yeah, I love that. It's your brand values have to resonate with all three parties. So you don't have sort of different ones for each.
Yeah.
For each, it's one that resonates across all three. I think that's fantastic. Um, you know, with this idea of having installation partners, um, you know, there's, if you think about the entire customer experience that you're, you know, that you're involved in, from, you know, the very beginning where it's, you know, thinking about or researching or even just recognizing that you need to replace your tires, all the way through to doing the actual installation. And like you said, there's probably several steps after that to just stay sort of top of mind and to continue to deliver an amazing experience. But there are parts of that process and that journey that you're not in complete control of, right? When you pass off a customer to an installation partner, you don't have maybe as tight of control as you do, say, on the online experience. And so, how do you drive a really consistent and cohesive brand experience across channels or parts of the experience that you may not own entirely?
It's a great question, and I think a lot of DTC brands in our situation probably feel this, have the same challenges. I think the first thing is really ensuring that it's like, again, we all have the same goal. We want the customer experience to be great. Obviously the installers want the customer to have a great experience because we just gave them a lead. They got a new customer where they might have not had in the past. So clearly they have the opportunity. We've heard this from installers. They appreciate, they're like, you just gave us lead. It's our job to do a really good job because then we can have that customer experience and make it a win-win for both. And ultimately they want to see if they can maintain that relationship with the customer in the future. And so they, understanding what we all both bring to the table and what we have this common goal for, I think is important. And then the second piece is just a lot, what we found is it goes back to my B2B days. It's like really about relationships and making sure that, the installer, the installation partners and ourselves, they see that we are in a partnership with them. So how do we actually drive more value for them on our site? So how do we make sure their digital presences are better? How do we make sure that we are representing their shop in a way that they want it, like they want the customer knows they specialize in certain services, et cetera. We're actually working very closely right now to evolve that experience further and make sure that we're doing that. That's, work to be done that we're doing. And so I think that's a really important part of the overall experience, and also just being a good partner to them to make sure that we have that end-to-end relationship.
Yeah, absolutely. And it sounds like, and we talked about this a bit, that there is a continuous process to learn, not just about the needs and the pain points of your customers, but then also the pain points and needs of your partners, and continuously evolving the experience and the functionality and the things that they need to be successful, right? And really you're supporting, in essence, an ecosystem, and you have to be continuously evolving the value that you're providing to each side of that ecosystem continuously. So that's fantastic. One of the things, and I think you mentioned this, which I like, this notion of values-based alignment, and almost like driving an emotional outcome, or aligning on an emotional outcome that you're driving for your consumer as well.
Yeah,
is great. So I know we're about 10 minutes out. I want to get one last question in, and then I think we're going to switch over to Q&A. So one of the things that I think could be interesting, and this is more to do with what comes next. So as you continue to evolve SimpleTire, the brand you're offering, how do you think about creating other parts or other products, or involving other products, making other products available? Is that part of the roadmap, or how do you think about that? What comes next? What do you offer as a part of this platform?
Yeah, I think it always starts with customer and consumer research. So I think it's, innovation is a really important part, because we know that the environment's changing constantly. And so you want to really be up to speed with what's the consumer thinking today, what are their needs today, and then hopefully understand the pain points, even kind of predict what could be the needs in the future. And so, I think every brand, is constantly in that innovation cycle, I would say. And it starts with the research. And so for us, I think we'll continue to start thinking about that and figuring out what are the pain points that, customers have, even with our current online experience. Maybe there might be some pain points, or, in the future, what are like ancillary, experiences they might have, and be able to do that. So more to come, but we're just like, we're continually trying to figure that out for the customer.
Yeah, that's great. Well, I think we're going to switch over to Q&A. So there's a couple of questions that are coming in. One of them is, oh, this one's interesting. So what's it been like to join a brand new company in the middle of a pandemic?
There's a lot of people that I've met have done this. I actually, my team, I think out of my team, two or three people have joined as well during the pandemic. We were growing so quickly as a company. And so it's really interesting. I would say, one, you realize it's pretty seamless in some ways to get up to speed with technology nowadays. Like, honestly, it sounds weird to say, oh, you just shut one computer down, go from one company, and then you open up a computer and then you're at the next company. It's not as like, seamless. It can seem seamless like that, but it hasn't been. I would say the hardest part is really connecting with team members, and like trying to connect, particularly with our leadership team, like me with my leadership team, and then my team members. And so that's probably the hardest part. We joke, we're like, we haven't even met each other in person, and it's been a year. Some cases for our people in our company, it's been a year. I think the nice part, though, I will say, is making sure you take the time to make that connection and meet people, like get to know people and try to create those bonds. So you try to do happy hours, you try to do all these new innovative ways of like connecting and bonding through virtual games. For example, we just had a virtual game night, a whole company, last night for St. Patty's Day. And so I think that's been helpful, to do that. But the camaraderie, you still can figure out how to create camaraderie, I think, even though you don't see each other. It's just a little more difficult.
Yeah. One thing that's been interesting is the need to be intentional about all the communication, sort of the onboarding, just continuously, creating these moments where you can have sort of informal get-togethers and things like that. You have to be very intentional about it. So one other question is, how do you think about what comes next? And this is either in the DTC space or just a marketing space in general. What are some of the things that you're seeing in terms of trends, things that will that perhaps are picking up, starting to get some traction, but maybe bigger things in the future?
Yeah. It's a great question, because sometimes you have to make time for it. I would say, to like sit down and think. Like, that's the hardest part, is like you're online, you're trying to just get things going, and then you're like, maybe I should take a moment to sit down and think, just like more broadly, and like next year, a couple years out. So I actually have to do it. I think about it actually now in a couple ways. One, the marketing end. So there's this whole, as a marketing person having a passion for marketing, like there's this whole space of like, how do I think about the future trends of marketing, like digital advertising and marketing? How do I think about content? Like, my big thing right now is content strategy. How do I think about digital content strategy end to end? How do I learn more about it? And so there's this whole, like, I would say from a functional point of view, there's this whole space of how do I think years out? And then there's this business sense of like the tire industry. How do I think about, what are the trends and marketplaces in the tire industry? And how do I think about long-term how that is? And so it's actually, it's exciting, but it's actually kind of like, how do I put the pieces together and think how they cross over? And so it is difficult to do, because it does require you to get outside what you do normally day to day and actually have that external thinking, like external viewpoint. And so you kind of have to be, I would say you have to be curious. I think personally, you just have to be curious and passionate about what you're reading and doing to be able to think about what's next, and taking the time to do that. So it's a lot of I would say it's just a lot of content reading, like subscribing to a lot of things and just reading it, and then meeting. For me, it's just meeting a lot of different people too, like networking, meeting people, keeping the connections you had in your, it's a lot of your networks. I can't tell you how many people I now tap into my own network that I haven't maybe talked to in several years, but hey, they're in a different space or a different place. It's like, hey, let's just connect so I can hear what you're up to, what you're thinking about. Those are actually really important as well, to make the connection and like to get that perspective from someone else to see what they're seeing and thinking.
Yeah, no, that's great. And it's interesting. I like how you put it. There's a functional and then there's the business.
Yeah,
And even when we talked, one of the things that you had mentioned was this notion of just the experience. So what are some things that, in terms of the experience, that are changing? And that can be looking at your own industry and things that others are doing.
absolutely.
It can also be looking at other industries as well.
Absolutely. Like the whole DTC business model, I think itself is really interesting, and thinking about how, I look at Wayfair, how do Wayfair think about tackling and how they evolved their DTC model and what they're doing now versus how other companies might be tackling similar challenges, might have made a different business decision or different choice based on, what they believe is their core values, what their differentiators are. So there is, even in between that, there's this whole to your point, DTC business model aspect that you want to read up on and learn about from other companies.
Yeah, that's great. That's great advice. So one other question is, what strategies and tactics do you see SimpleTire using to support the installation partners?
It's actually, it's like classic B. I go classic B2B on communicate. Like, it's at the end of the day, it's a relationship. So I would say it's just calling up the installer. Like, it's like building the relation. It sounds weird. It sounds weird because you think it's so, different and new, but in reality, it's like classic, relationship building and making sure there's a strong partnership. So it's having connection, frequent communication, trying to figure out how you add value in all those relationships, and how do you provide that value. It's also like just learning more on what they want, like what your partners want, and how do you build potentially something what they want. It's like, at the end of the day, they are sort of our customers. So if the process that we are using today together isn't necessarily seamless or easy, okay, then how can we fix it? Like, how do we make it better? And so, I think that's a really important part, because like I said, one, your brand is not just with the customer, but it should be in the whole ecosystem. And two, if you don't make it, you have to make it as easy and seamless as possible with your partners. So they're going to want to work with you versus work with your competitor, or do something different. Or maybe it doesn't work out. They realize, I need to go do a different type of model that works for me better. And so it's even a choice for them to think about what like, do they even want to play in the DTC space with other players or us? So that's a really important part, is like, how do we think about like simplifying it for them as well?
Yeah. Well, this is maybe building on that question. And I know we're kind of running up. I was going to ask one last question, but I don't know.
Go ahead, ask your last question.
Well, I was just curious, given that your installation partners are sort of bound geographically, how do you think about adding new installation partners so that you don't sort of oversaturate a region, or is that even a concern? It's never a concern?
No, I think, at the end of the day, we want to make sure that the customer has access to their choice of who they feel comfortable picking, based on like making sure we have the information